Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Petty Pendergrass production, where today we will be talking about David Benioff and D.B. Weiss. Now, in case y'all don't know who these two are, these are the guys who were the showrunners for the hit television show Game of Thrones, and they are also the ones responsible for that trash last season of Game of Thrones. Now, I could have did a Petty Pendergrass on that part alone, and I'm gonna tell you why. So they rushed through the last season of Game of Thrones only so they could work on what they were going to work on, the second trilogy to the Star Wars series after this trash Rise of Skywalker. Disney ended up pulling the rug from beneath them because of how horrible the last season of Game of Thrones was. They did not want that on their conscience, even though I don't know why they wanted this trilogy of Star Wars on their conscience either, but hey, it is what it is. But they basically gave their fans, Game of Thrones fans such as myself, their ass to kiss with that last season. I mean, it was horrible. Those of you who watched it know exactly what I'm talking about. It has no redeemable quality about it at all, to the point where you probably don't even want to watch the entire series all over again, at least to that point, because it just ruined it for you. Just left a bad taste in your mouth. Just absolutely horrible. Just shitted on how 7 seasons of greatness, and took a whole year off for some change, and that's what we got. Terrible. But the reason why I'm doing this production today is because if you also remember, David Benioff and D.B. Weiss were also slated to do a new show for HBO called Confederacy, in which this was going to be a fantasy type show in which they were going to talk about what if the Confederate Army had won the war, because as we all know, they lost it. But basically it was saying if they won the war, they would put black people back into bondage. So basically it was going to be a show about what would happen if they won the war and slavery got reignited, and it kept going on for more and more years past 1865. That's basically what it was going to talk about. And guess what happened, ladies and gentlemen? Just like the Confederate Army is dead, so is this planned show. Because HBO said, nope, we're not going forward with it. And to that I say, good. I'm about to read this article so we can get more information about what's going on here. If you can get it right, there's a real opportunity to advance the racial discussion in America. This is what HBO President Casey Bloys said after scores of people made it clear they didn't actually want a speculative series about slavery in the modern age from the two guys in the above picture. Exactly, because no one asked for that. If y'all remember, I think I talked about this when it first got announced. I'm like, who asked for that? Like, you going to jump from Game of Thrones after giving us that trash season, that trash last season at that, and then try to do this and think that we're going to be okay with that. And truth be told, it wasn't just black people that were upset about that. And I think mainly because some of the fans of other ethnicities were upset with that last season. So they were already had a bitter taste in their mouths. They didn't want to see anything else from these two guys, which is also why I believe Disney cut the cord from them to do another trilogy of Star Wars. But let me continue. Well, it appears they couldn't get it right because Bloys has confirmed to TV Line that Confederate, a show the exec was really excited about once upon a time, is really truly dead. Announced in the summer of 2017, the series from Game of Thrones showrunners David Benioff and D.B. Weiss was set in an alternative reality where the South won the Civil War and successfully seceded, resulting in a world where slavery remains legal and has evolved into a modern-day institution. The blowback was swift, and not only because the show was touted by HBO as the brainchild of two white dudes, some called it slavery fanfic, and as we opined at the time, such speculative projects are as tired as they are exploitive, especially in a country that's still got a serious race problem. All its exciting political intrigue revolves entirely around a fantasy where black people are still slaves, a fantasy that America, specifically white America, loves to indulge in. Just look at how, despite there being a number of worthy contenders, the only person of color to be nominated for an acting nomination Oscar this year was playing Harriet Tubman, although that movie was trash as well. HBO remained committed to the series in the aftermath of the controversy, but said it was not being actively worked on. Come that December, adding that they wouldn't be able to focus on this new project for a while, maybe even 18 months. Since then, Benioff and Weiss botched the final season of Game of Thrones, which I have alluded to, dropped a divisive finale, and disembarked from the Star Wars trilogy they were set to develop. They also signed a highly lucrative deal with Netflix, which was probably proof enough that Confederate wasn't going to happen. Still, it's nice to know we're finally done writing about it. See, this is the thing with those two. They had their hands in too many things at one time. I didn't even know they were supposed to be doing something with Netflix. So you rushed through the last season of Game of Thrones to work on something at Disney for another Star Wars trilogy that didn't happen. And that's why they rushed through it. You were supposedly working on this lame Confederate show that's not going to happen because you were doing something over at Netflix. It just shows right here that these guys probably aren't the best ones to work with in Hollywood, and maybe the only thing that's going to be good on their resumes are the first 7 seasons of Game of Thrones, because we know everything after that is a dumpster fire. But I'm glad that this thing, and that's all I'm referred to as, is a thing, is not happening any longer. I mean, like that article said, it's nothing but slave fan fiction. Like you have these 2 palm-colored men who was going to create a show about what would happen if the South won the Civil War, the Confederacy won, and they seceded from the Union, and then slavery carried over into modern day. We're not talking about way back when. We're talking about if slavery was still around in 2020 or whenever the time period was going to be set, which was going to be very modern and very recent. We're talking about Jim Crow didn't even have to exist because it was still slavery going on. Civil rights movement, what is that? So they were going to erase everything that happened post-slavery, post-Civil War, and create a whole new fantasy. And I'm telling you right now, them palm-colored folks who like stuff like that, we're going to eat all of it up, because that is a fantasy of theirs too. That's who they were creating this for. They weren't doing it for us. They were doing it for them. So I'm glad this happened to them. Now, had this been 2 black male directors who had created something where what would happen if Nazi Germany was successful in, with the Holocaust carrying over longer than it did, it would have been a wrap. As soon as that thing hit the desk as an idea, it would have been done. The fact that this idea was allowed to carry over to the point where it almost could have gotten greenlit says a lot. But this is Hollywood we're talking about here, so it doesn't surprise me, and it should surprise no one. But this concludes my petty Pendergrass production. I know it sounded more serious in tone rather than petty, but the petty part came in when the fact that this whole thing got dropped. Hopefully their careers fall from this, but then again, these are 2 palm-colored men. One major success for them means they probably are going to have staying power in Hollywood forever, because if it was one of us, no matter how many successes we had, it could have been 10,000, one screw up, and then we would have been done. So that's why I decided to do it like this, because this whole thing was doomed to start from the start, and I'm glad that it has now faltered, and it has fallen, and it has failed. But y'all let me know what y'all think about this down in the comments. Like, share, subscribe. Make sure to follow me on Twitter and have your notifications turned on. I will talk to you in the next one.